Section 5 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers. Account of Brazile. I had Nieuwhoff's account of Brazile on board, and by all the inquiry and observation I could make, found his description of the country, its product and animals, to be just, particularly of that monster called Laboia, or the Roebuck serpent, which I inquired after, thinking it incredible till the Portuguese governor told me there are some of them 30 feet long, as big as a barrel, and devour a roebuck at once, from whence they had their name. I was also told that one of these serpents was killed near this place a little before our arrival. Tigers are very plenty here on the continent, but not so ravenous as those in India. The product of Brazile is well known to be red wood, sugars, gold, tobacco, whale oil, snuff, and several sorts of drugs. The Portuguese build their best ships here. The country is now become very populous, and the people delight much in arms, especially about the gold mines, where those of all sorts resort, but mostly negroes and mulattoes. 'Tis but 4 years since they would be under no government, but now they have submitted. Some men of repute here told me the mines increase very fast, and that the gold is got much easier at these mines than in any other country. This is all I can affirm from my own observation concerning this country, which was discovered first by the famous Americus Vespucius, anno 1500, when he called it Santa Cruz, but the Portuguese afterwards named it Brazile, from the red wood of that name which grows here. It's situate in the torrid zone, and extends from the equinoctial to the latitude of 28 south. The extent from east to west is uncertain, therefore I can determine nothing concerning it. The Portuguese divide it into 14 districts or captainships, 6 of which, being the northern part, were subdued by the Dutch about the year 1637, and a peace concluded, allowing it to be called Dutch Brazile, which extended from north to south about 180 leagues. And since it is not unusual for the Dutch to lose their settlements abroad, it mayn't be amiss to give a brief account how they were outed of this profitable country. In 1643 the face of the Dutch affairs there began to alter for the worse. The magazines of their West India Company were exhausted by several expeditions against Angola, &c. and receiving no supplies from Holland as usual, the Great Council at the Recife, their capital in Brazile, was forced to make use of what was due to the Company, for paying the garrisons and civil officers, and by consequence to force their conquered debtors the Portuguese to prompt payment. This obliged the debtors to borrow money at 3 or 4 per cent. Per month, which impoverished them so in a little time that they were neither able to pay principal nor interest. The Portuguese immersed themselves in debt to the Company, because of their hopes that the fleets coming from Portugal would quickly subdue the Dutch and pay off all scores. Besides, there happened a great mortality among the Portuguese negroes, which they purchased from the Dutch at 300 pieces of 8 per head. This completed their ruin, which together with their hatred to the Dutch on account of religion, made them resolve on a general revolt. The Dutch at the same time were engaged in a war with Spain at home, and Count Maurice, who was governor of Dutch Brazile, was recalled just in the height of the plot. The Dutch had several discoveries of it, and an account of Portuguese commissions, importing that this revolt was undertaken for the honour of God, the propagation of the Roman faith, the service of the king, and common liberty. They complained of this to the Portuguese government in Brazile, who told them they would cultivate a good correspondence with them, according to the orders of the king their master, and wrote so to the Dutch council, yet still carried on the conspiracy, till at last the rebellion broke out. The Dutch renewed their complaints, but the Portuguese government denied their having any hand in it, till in 1645 they openly invaded the Dutch, on pretence at first of appeasing the revolts of the Portuguese in the Dutch provinces, according to the tenor of the peace. But afterwards, when they had got footing, they alleged the Dutch had murdered many of the Portuguese in cool blood, and then carried on the war till 1660, when the Dutch were forced to abandon Brazile in the following conditions: that the Crown of Portugal should pay the States £800,000 in money or goods, and that the places taken on each side in the East Indies should remain to the present possessors; and that a free trade should be allowed the Dutch in Portugal and at their settlements in Africa and Brazile, without paying any more custom than the Portuguese. But the other agreements have been since made between the two States, and the Portuguese remain in full possession of this fine Country, without allowing the Dutch to trade to it. This they fancy makes them sufficient amends for the loss of their large Conquests in India, taken from them by the Dutch East India Company, the Portuguese being now the least traders thither, after enjoying the whole East India Trade for above 100 Years. Nieuwhof, who gave the best account of Brazile at that time, assigns the following causes for so easy a reconquest of it by the Portuguese. 1. The Dutch took no care to have sufficient Colonies of their own Natives, nor to keep strong Garrisons in the Country. 2. They left the Portuguese in possession of all their Sugar Mills and Plantations, which hinder'd the Dutch from getting any considerable Footing in the open Country. 3. The Plantations and Sugar Mills that fell into their hands by forfeiture or otherwise, they sold at such excessive Rates, and laid such Taxes on the Product, that the Dutch did not care to purchase them. 4. The States of Holland, instead of reinforcing the Garrisons of Brazile, according to Prince Maurice's advice, reduced them lower, notwithstanding all the remonstrances of the Company to the contrary; for they were so intent upon their conquests in the East Indies, that they seemed willing to be rid of Brazile, which is now a vast and populous Country, and employs a great number of large Ships yearly from Portugal, who carry home an immense Treasure of Gold, besides all other Commodities of that Country. Whilst Prince Maurice was in Brazile, the Dutch fitted Ships thence for Chili, which arrived there; but wanted a sufficient Force to withstand the Spaniard, while they could be recruited, or gain an Interest amongst the Natives, which they might have easily done, could they have settled, because at that time the Spaniards had not conquer'd the Indians of Chili: so the Dutch being too weak, were forced to return without effecting any thing. I shall conclude this Head with a brief Account of the Natives of Brazile from Nieuwhof, whose Authority, as I have said already, I found upon Enquiry to be very good. They are divided into several Nations, and speak different Languages. They are generally of a middling Size, well limb'd, and their Women not ill featured. They are not born black, but become so by the Heat of the Sun. They have black Eyes, black curl'd Hair, and have their Noses made flat when young. They come soon to maturity, yet generally live to a great age, without much sickness; and many Europeans live here to above 100 Years old, which is ascribed to the goodness of the Climate. The Portuguese cut off such multitudes of them that they perfectly hate that Nation, but were civil enough to the Dutch, because they treated them kindly. Such as live next the Europeans wear Shirts of Linen or Calico, and the chief of 'em affect our Apparel; but those within land go for the most part naked, covering their privities slightly with Leaves or Grass fasten'd about them with a String; and the Men exceed the Women in modesty. Their Huts are built of Stakes, and cover'd with Palm Tree Leaves. Their Dishes and Cups are made of Calabasses, being the Shells of a sort of Pompions. Their chief Furniture is Hammocks of Cotton made like Network, and these they fasten to Sticks, and use them for Beds, and when they travel tie them to Trees. The Wives follow their Husbands to War and elsewhere, and carry their Luggage in a Basket, with a Child hung about them in a piece of Calico, a Parrot or an Ape in one hand, and leading a Dog by a String in the other; while the idle Lubber carries nothing but his Arms, which are Bows and Arrows, Darts, or wooden Clubs. They know nothing of Arithmetick, but count their Years by laying a Chestnut in the Season. Those who inhabit the inland parts know scarce any thing of Religion, yet they have a sort of Priests, or rather Conjurers, who pretend to foretell what's to come. They have a notion of a Supreme Being more excellent than the rest; some reckon this to be Thunder, and others Ursa Minor, or some Constellation. They fancy that after Death their Souls are transplanted into Devils, or enjoy all sorts of Pleasures in the lovely Fields beyond the Mountains, if they have kill'd and eat many of their Enemies: but those that never did any thing of the moment, they say are to be tormented by Devils. These People are much afraid of Apparitions and Spirits, and make Offerings to pacify 'em. Some of 'em are mightily addicted to Sorcery, to revenge themselves upon their Enemies; and they have others who pretend to cure those that are so bewitched. The Castilians converted some of them, but the Dutch Ministers were more successful, till they were hinder'd by the Revolt of the Portuguese. The Brazilian women are very fruitful, have easy Labour, retire to the Woods, where they bring forth alone, and return after washing themselves and their Child; the Husbands lying a bed the first 24 hours, and being treated as if they had endur'd the Pains. The Tapoyars, who inhabit the inland Country on the West, are the most barbarous of the Natives, taller and stronger than the rest, and indeed than most Europeans. They wear little Sticks through their Cheeks and under Lips, are Man eaters, and use poison'd Darts and Arrows. They change their Habitations according to the Season, and live chiefly by hunting and fishing. Their Kings and great Men are distinguish'd by the manner of shaving their Crowns, and their long Nails. Their Priests are Sorcerers, make them believe that the Devils appear to 'em in forms of Insects, and perform their diabolical Worship in the Night, when the Women make a dismal howling, which is their chief Devotion. They allow Polygamy, yet punish Adultery by Death; and when young Women are marriageable, but courted by nobody, their Mothers carry 'em to their Princes, who deflower 'em, and this they reckon a great Honour. Some of these People were much civilized by the Dutch, and very serviceable to them, but kept under subjection to their own Kings. For the extraordinary Animals, Plants, &c. of Brazile, I refer to Newhoff, being sensible that the Descriptions of such things are not my Province; but I thought it convenient to give this Hint for the Diversion of such Readers as may relish it better than a Mariner's bare Journal. The River of the Amazons being the Northern Boundary of Brazile, I shall describe it here. According to most Geographers, it rises in the Mountains of Peru, and is composed at first of 2 Rivers, one of which begins about Lat. 9° S. and the other about 15°. The Sansons call the latter Huaca or Maranhon, which communicates its Name to the other. 'Twas called Amazons, not because of any Nation of Viragos, who as some fancy are govern'd by a Queen, and have no Commerce with our Sex; but at certain times, when they make an Appointment with the Males of neighbouring Nations, and if they prove with Child, keep the Daughters and send away the Sons, as the Greeks fabled of their Amazons. But the true reason of the Name is, that the Spaniards, who first discover'd it, were told of such a terrible barbarous Nation of Women by some of the Natives, on purpose to frighten them, that they did actually on several places of this River find their Women as fierce and warlike as the Men, it being their custom to follow their Husbands, &c. to War, on purpose to animate them, and to share in their Fate, as we find was anciently practised by the Women of Gaul, Germany, and Britain. But to return to the Course of the River. The Sansons give us a Map of it from the Discoveries of Teixeira, who sail'd up and down the same in 1637, 1638, and 1639. The River, he says, begins at the foot of a Chain of Mountains named Cordillera, about 9 or 10 Leagues East of Quito in Peru. It runs first from West to East, turns afterwards South, and then after many windings and turnings holds its main Course East till it falls into the Atlantic Sea. Its Fountains and Mouth are very near under the Equator, and the main of its Streams is in the 4th and 5th Degree of South Latitude. The Rivers which fall into it on the North side rise about 1 or 2 Degrees North at Latitude, and those on the South side, some of them begin in 10, some in 15, and others in the 21st Foot of South Latitude. Its Channel from Junta de los Reyos, about 60 Degrees from its Head, till it is join'd by the River Maranhon, is from 1 to 2 Leagues in breadth. From thence, say the Sansons, 'tis from 3 to 4, but grows larger as it advances toward the Atlantic, into which it falls by a Mouth from 50 to 60 Leagues broad, betwixt Cape Nort on the Coast of Guiana, and Cape Zaparara on the Coast of Brazile. Its depth from Junta de los Reyos to Maranhon is from 5 to 10 Fathom, from thence to Rio Negro from 12 to 20, and from thence to the Sea from 30 to 50, and sometimes a great deal more. 'Tis always of a good depth near the Shore, and has no Sand Banks till it come towards the Sea. Its running in a continued Descent from West to East makes the sailing down it very easy, and the East Winds, which last most part of the Day, are very commodious for those who sail up this River. From the Fountain to its Mouth 'tis 8 or 900 Leagues in a direct Line, but the windings and turnings make it about 1200. Some compute it at 1800, and others 1276. But then they derive its Source from the Lake Loricocha near Guiaquil in Peru, about Lat. 10. Authors differ whether this River or La Plata be the greatest, which I shall not take upon me to determine. The Rivers which run into it on the right and left, have their Courses from 100 to 600 Leagues in length, and their Banks are well inhabited by multitudes of People of different Nations, not so barbarous as those of Brazile, nor so polite as the Natives of Peru. They live chiefly upon Fish, Fruit, Corn, and Roots, are all Idolaters, but pay no great respect to their Idols, nor perform any public Worship to them, except when they go upon Expeditions. Texeira and his fellow discoverers say that most of those countries enjoy a temperate air, though in the middle of the torrid zone. This is probably owing to the multitude of rivers with which they are watered, the east winds which continue most of the day, the equal length of the days and nights, the great number of forests, and the annual inundations of the rivers, which fructify this country as that of the Nile does Egypt. Their trees, fields, and flowers are verdant all the year, and the goodness of the air prevents their being infested so much with serpents and other dangerous insects as Brazile and Peru. In the forests they have store of excellent honey, accounted very medicinal. They have balm good against all wounds. Their fruit, corn, and roots are not only in greater plenty, but much better than anywhere else in America. They have vast number of Fish of all sorts in the Rivers and Lakes, and among others Sea Cows, which feed on the Banks, and Tortoises of a large size and delicate taste. Their Woods abound with Venison, and afford materials for building the largest Ships. They have many Trees of 5 or 6 fathom round in the Trunk, and inexhaustible Stores of Ebony and Brazile Wood, Cocoa, Tobacco, Sugar Canes, Cotton, a scarlet Dye called Rocone, besides Gold and Silver in their Mines, and the Sand of their Rivers. The Nations who inhabit about this and the other Rivers that run into it, are reckon'd by Sanson and others 150, and their Villages so thick in many places that most of 'em are within call of one another. Among those People, the Homagues, who live toward the Head of this great River, are mostly noted for their Manufactures of Cotton; the Corospiares for their Earthenware; the Surenes, who live betwixt Lat. 5 and 10, and Long. 314 and 316, for their Joiners Work; the Topinambes, who live in a great Island of this River at about Lat. 4 and Long. 320, for their Strength. Their Arms in general are Darts and Javelins, Bows and Arrows, with Targets of Cane or Fish Skin. They make war upon one another to purchase Slaves for their Drudgery, but otherwise they treat them kindly enough. Among the Rivers that fall into it on the North side, the Napo, Agaric, Putumaye, Genupape, Coropatube, and others have Gold in their Sands. Below Coropatube there are Mines of several sorts in the Mountains. In those of Yagnare there are Mines of Gold. In Picora there are Mines of Silver. On the River Paragoche there are precious Stones of several sorts, and Mines of Sulphur, &c. near other Rivers. Those of Putumaye and Caqueta are large Rivers, the latter is divided into 2 Branches, one falls into the Amazons River by the name of Rio Negro, which is the largest on the North side, and the other, called Rio Grande, falls into the Orinoco. The chief Rivers that fall into it on the South side are the Marabon, Amaramaye, Tape, Catua, Cusignate, Madere or Cayenne, and many other large ones. The Sansons add, that on this River about 200 Leagues from the Sea, there is a Bosphorus or Strait of 1 mile broad, that the Tide comes up hither, so that it may serve as a Key to all the Trade of those Countries. But the Portuguese being already possess'd of Para on the side of Brazile, Corupa and Estero on the side of Guiana, and Cojemina, an Island at the mouth of it, they may by fortifying the Island of the Sun, or some other place in its chief Outlet, be Masters of all the Trade. William Davis, a Londoner, who lived in this Country some time, gives us this further Account of it, and of the Inhabitants about this River. They have store of excellent wild Fowl in their Woods, and among others Parrots, as many as we have Pigeons in England, and as good Meat. Their Rivers and Lakes abound with Fish, but such as catch them must be upon their guard against Crocodiles, Alligators, and Water Serpents. The Country is subject to frequent and violent Storms of Rain, Thunder, and Lightning, which commonly hold 16 or 18 hours. And the Inhabitants are terribly pester'd with Mosquitoes. There are abundance of petty kings who live upon their particular rivers, on which they decide their quarrels with canoes, and the conqueror eats up the conquered, so that one king's belly proves another's sepulchre. The regalia by which they are distinguished is a crown of parrots' feathers, a chain of lions' teeth or claws about their necks or middles, and a wooden sword in their hands. Both sexes go quite naked and wear their hair long, but the men pluck theirs off on the crown. He says 'tis a question whether the women's hair or breasts be longest. The men thrust pieces of cane through the foreskin of their pudenda, their ears and under lips, and hang glass beads at the gristle of their noses, which bob to and fro when they speak. They are thievish and such good archers that they kill fish in the water with their arrows. They eat what they catch without bread or salt. They know not the use of money, but barter one thing for another, and will give 20 shillings worth of Provisions, &c. for a glass bead or a Jew's harp. I come next to the discovery of this River, when Gonzales Pizarro, brother to Francis that conquer'd Peru, was Governor of the North Provinces of that Country, he came to a great River where he saw the Natives bring Gold in their Canoes to exchange with the Spaniards. This put him upon a complete discovery of that River from its Fountains to its Mouth. In order to this he sent out Captain Francisco de Orellana, in 1540, with a Pinnace and Men. Some say he went also himself, and sail'd down the River Xauxa or Maranhon 43 days, but wanting Provisions commanded Orellana to go in quest of some down the River, and to return as soon as he could; but Orellana being carried down 200 Leagues through a desert Country, the Stream was so rapid, that he found it impracticable to return, and therefore sail'd on till he came to that which is properly called the River of the Amazons. He had spent all his Provisions, and eat the very Leather on board, so that 7 of his Men died of want. In January that year, after sailing 200 Leagues further, he came to a Town on the Bank of the River, where the People were afraid of him, but at last furnish'd him with Provisions; and here he built a large Brigantine. He set out again on the 2nd of February, and 30 Leagues further was almost cast away by the violent Stream of a River which run into that of the Amazons on the right side. He sail'd above 20 Leagues further, and was invited ashore in the Province of Aparia, where he discoursed several of their Caciques, who forewarned him of his danger by the Amazons. He stay'd here 35 days, built a new Brigantine, and repair'd the other. He sail'd again in April through a desert Country, where he lived upon Herbs and toasted Indian Wheat. On the 12th day of May he arrived at the populous Country of Macaparo, where he was attack'd by many Canoes full of Natives arm'd with long Shields, Bows, and Arrows, but fought his way through them till he came to a Town where he took Provisions by force, after 2 hours fight with some thousands of the Natives, whom he put to flight, and had 18 of his Men wounded, but all recover'd. He put off again, and was pursued 2 days by 8000 Indians in 130 Canoes, till he was past the Frontiers of that Country. Then he landed at another Town 340 Leagues from Aparia, which being abandoned by the Natives, he rested there 3 days, and took in Provisions. 2 Leagues from hence he came to the mouth of a great River with 3 Islands, for which he called it Trinity River. The adjacent Country seem'd very fruitful, but so many Canoes came out to attack him, that he was forced to keep the middle of the Stream. Next day he came to a little Town, where he took Provisions again by force, and found abundance of curious Earthenware finely painted, and several Idols of monstrous shapes and sizes. He also saw some Gold and Silver, and was told by the Inhabitants that there was abundance of both in the Country. He sail'd on 100 Leagues further till he came to the Land of Panganana, where the People were civil, and readily furnish'd him with what he wanted. On Whitsunday he passed by a great Town divided into many quarters, with a Canal from each to the River. Here he was attack'd by Canoes, but soon repulsed them with his Fire Arms. He afterwards landed, and took Provisions at several Towns. He met with the mouth of a River, the Water as black as ink, and the Stream so rapid, that for 20 Leagues it did not mix with that of the Amazons. He saw several small Towns in his passage, enter'd one by force, which had a Wall of Timber, and took abundance of Fish there. He pursued his Voyage, by many great Towns and well inhabited Provinces, by which time the River was grown so wide, that they could not see the one side from the other. Here he took an Indian, by whose information he supposed this to be the proper Country of the Amazons. He sail'd on by many other Towns, and landed at one where he found none but Women. He took abundance of fish there, and resolved to have stayed for some time; but the men coming home in the evening, they attacked him, so that he shipped off and continued his voyage. He saw several great towns with paved roads between rows of fruit trees into the country, and landed for provisions. The inhabitants opposed him, but their leader being killed, they fled and left him at liberty to carry off provisions. From hence he sailed to an island for rest, and was informed by a female he had taken prisoner that there were men like themselves in that country, and some white women, whom he conceived to be Spaniards. She told them they were entertained by a cacique. After several days' sail he came to another great town, near which the Indian told him those whites did live. He kept on his course, and after 4 days came to another town, where the natives were civil, furnished him with provisions, and here he saw abundance of cotton cloth, and a place of worship hung with weapons and 2 mitres resembling those of a bishop. He went to a wood on the other side in order to rest, but was soon dislodged by the natives. He saw several large towns on both sides of the river, but did not touch at them. Some days after they came to a town where he got provisions. After doubling a point, he saw other large towns where the people stood ready on the banks to oppose him. He offered 'em toys in order to please them, but in vain. He continued his voyage, and on the banks he saw several bodies of people. He stood into them, and landing his men, the natives fought with great resolution, 10 or 12 being white women of an extraordinary size, with long hair, and all naked but their pudenda, who seemed to be their commanders. They were armed with bows and arrows, and 7 of them being killed, the rest fled. Orellana had several men wounded, and finding that multitudes of the natives were marching against him, he sailed off, reckoning that he had now made 1400 leagues during his voyage, but still did not know how far he was from the sea. He afterwards came to another town, where he met with like opposition. Several of his men were wounded, and his chaplain lost an eye. Here he observed several woods of oak and cork trees. He called this province by the name of St. John's, because he came to it on that saint's day. He sailed on till he met with some islands, where he was attacked by 200 canoes, with 30 or 40 men in each, abundance of drums, trumpets, and pipes, &c., but he kept them off with his firearms. These islands appeared to be high, fruitful, and pleasant, and the largest of 'em about 50 leagues long, but he could take in no provisions, because the canoes continually pursued him. When he came to the next province, he perceived many large towns on the larboard side of the river. Multitudes of natives came in their canoes to gaze on him, and his Indian prisoner informed him that these countries abounded with gold and silver. Orellana was here obliged to barricado his boats to cover his men, because one of 'em was killed by a poison arrow. As he sailed on, he came to inhabited islands, and perfectly discerned the tide. Here he was attacked by multitudes of canoes, and lost some more men by poisoned arrows. There were many towns on the starboard side of the river, and he found other inhabited islands, where he got provisions, but was attacked and beat off when he landed on the continent, till he came near the mouth of the river, where the people readily furnish'd him. He sailed 200 leagues among the islands, where he found the tide strong, and at last in August that year found a passage to the sea of about 50 leagues wide, where the tide rises 5 or 6 fathom, and the fresh water runs 20 leagues into the sea. Esquire Harcourt, in his Voyage to Guiana, says 30 leagues, and that the fresh water there is very good. He was mightily distressed for want of rigging and provisions, till he came to the island of Cubagua, from whence he went to Spain to give the king an account of his discovery. The manuscripts taken by Captain Witherington say that Orellana was about a year and a half upon this river. When he reported his discoveries, the King of Spain sent him back with a fleet and 600 men to take possession of this river in 1544, some say 1549, but the project came to nothing. For the captain himself, after he had sailed up 100 leagues, died with 57 of his men by the unhealthiness of the air, and some of them sailed 60 leagues higher, where they were friendly entertained by the natives, but being too few to pursue the discovery, they returned to the island Margarita, where they found Orellana's lady, says Herrera, who told them that her husband died of grief for the loss of so many of his men by sickness and the attacks of the Indians. And thus they returned re infecta, so that Orellana received no other advantage for his danger and expense, but the honour of the first discovery, and having the river called by his name in some authors. Ovalle says that he lost half his men at the Canaries and Cape Verde, and his fleet was reduced to 2 large boats before he came back to the river, so that he was too weak to attempt a further discovery. The manuscripts taken by Captain Witherington say the second person who attempted it was Luis de Mello, a Portuguese, by order of his sovereign King John III, to whom the country from the mouth of this river to that of La Plata belonged, according to the partition agreed on betwixt the Portuguese and the Spaniards. He had 10 ships and 800 men, but lost 8 of his ships at the mouth of the river, so that he went to the island Margarita, from whence his men were dispersed all over the Indies. 2 or 3 captains from the kingdom of New Granada attempted it afterwards by land, but without success. In 1560 those of Peru tried it another way. The viceroy sent Pedro de Ursua, a native of Navarre, with 700 men to the head of this river, where he built pinnaces and canoes, and having furnished himself with provisions and taken 2000 Indians with many horses on board, he embarked on the river Jauxa or Maranhon. He sailed till he came to a plain country, where he began to build a town; but his men not being used to such labour, and fatigued by the hot and rainy seasons, they murmured, though they had provisions enough, and a great prospect of finding store of gold. The mutineers were headed by Lopez de Aguirre, a Biscayner, who had been an old mutineer in Peru, and being joined by Ferdinand de Guzman, a Spanish soldier, and one Saldueno, who was enamoured on Orusa's beautiful lady, they murdered him when asleep, with all his friends and chief officers. Then they proclaimed Guzman their king, but 20 days after he was also murdered by Lopez, who assumed the title to himself. Being a fellow of mean birth, he murdered all the gentlemen in company, lest any of them should rival him; and having formed a guard of ruffians about him, he became so jealous of his new dignity, and was so conscious of what he deserved, that when any of the men talked together, he concluded they were plotting against him, and sent his ruffians to murder them. Abundance of the rest, and the women falling sick, he barbarously left them to the mercy of the natives, and sailed to the island Margarita with 230 men. He was well entertained by the governor, who took him to be one of the king's officers; but this ungrateful villain did speedily murder him and his friends, ravaged the island, forced some soldiers to go along with him, and pretended to conquer the Indies, but was defeated, taken, and hanged by the governor of New Granada. The wretch murdered his own daughter, that she might not be insulted by his enemies, and then attempted to murder himself, but was prevented. Thus concluded that fatal expedition. The Sansons say the next attempt was by those of Cusco in 1566, but it came to nothing, for their leaders fell out and fought with one another, which made the rest a prey to the natives; or that only Maldonado, one of their captains, and 2 priests, escaped to carry home the news. 2 of the generals of Para and governors of Maranhon were the next that renewed the attempt by the king's command, but met with so many cross accidents that they could not effect it. In 1606 2 Jesuits set out from Quito, thinking to reduce the country on this river by their preaching, but one of them was killed by the natives, and the other narrowly escaped, says Ovalle. The next discovery was by Captain John de Palacios. Authors differ as to the time, but most agree 'twas in 1635. He set out from Quito with a few armed men and Franciscan friars, sailed down the river till he came to Anel, where he was killed in 1636, and most of his companions returned, except 2 monks and 5 or 6 soldiers, who sailed down in a little vessel as far as Para, the capital of Brazile, where they acquainted Teixeira the Portuguese governor with their discovery, who upon their information sent 47 canoes with 70 Spaniards and 1200 Indians to sail up the river under Teixeira the sailor. He set out in October 1637, and met with several difficulties, which occasioned many of the Indians to forsake him; but he went on and set a captain with 8 canoes to make discoveries before him. This captain arrived June 24, 1638, at a Spanish town built at the conflux of the rivers Harari and Amazons, and dispatched a canoe to acquaint Teixeira with it. This encouraged him to proceed till he came to the mouth of the river Chavalas, where it falls into the Amazons, and there he left part of his men under a captain, and the rest at Junta de los Rios under another, while himself with a few went forward to Quito. The other Captain arriv'd there some time before, and both were well receiv'd by the Spaniards, to whom they reported their Discovery in September 1638. The Men he left behind were well entertain'd by the Natives at first, but quarrelling with them afterwards, suffer'd much for want of Provisions, and had little but what they took by force. Upon the News of this Discovery, the Count de Chinchon, Viceroy of Peru, sent Orders from Lima to furnish Texeira with all Necessaries for his Return down the River, and appointed Father d'Acugna Rector of the College of Cuenca, and another Jesuit to attend him and carry the News to Spain. They set out in February 1639, and arrived at Para in December following, from whence d'Acugna went to Spain, and published his Account of this River in 1640. The Sum of his Discovery, besides what has been mentioned already, is as follows. There's a Tree on the Banks of this River call'd Andirova, from whence they draw an Oil that is a specific for curing Wounds. There's plenty of Ironwood, so nam'd because of its Hardness, Redwood, Logwood, Brazile, and Cedars so large, that Acugna says he measur'd some that were 30 span around the Trunk. They have Timber enough to build Ships, make Cordage of the Barks of Trees, and Sails of Cotton, but want Iron. They make Hatchets of Tortoise Shells, or hard Stones ground to an Edge, and Chisels, Planes, and Wimbles of the Teeth and Horns of wild Beasts. Their chief Directors are Sorcerers, who are the Managers of their hellish Worship, and teach them how to revenge themselves on their Enemies by Poison and other barbarous Methods. Some of them keep the Bones of their deceased Relations in their Houses, and others burn them with all their Movables, and solemnize their Funerals first by mourning, then by excessive drinking. Yet the Father says they are in general good natur'd and courteous, and many times left their own Huts to accommodate him and his Company. Some of these Nations, particularly the Omaguas, whose Country is 260 Leagues long, and the most populous on the River, are decently clad in Raiment of Cotton, and trade in it with their Neighbours. Some of the other Nations wear Plates of Gold at their Ears and Nostrils, and their Joiners are so expert, that they make Chairs and other household Furnitures in the shapes of several Animals with great Art. The Jesuits of Quito in Peru have engraved a Map of this River, in which they give the following Account, viz. That 'tis the greatest known in the World; that though it be call'd by the Name of Amazons or Oriana, its true Name is Maranhon; that it rises from the Lake Luricocha, as we have mentioned already, runs 1800 Leagues, and falls into the North Sea by 84 Mouths; that near the City Borja it is pent up by a Strait call'd El Pongo, not above 13 Fathom wide and 3 Leagues long, where the Stream is so rapid that Boats run it in a quarter of an hour. The truth of this must be submitted to the judgment of the Reader, but it seems very improbable, since none of those who sailed up and down this River describe it thus: besides, 'twere impossible to sail up against so rapid a Stream without a Tide, which the Sansons say comes up to this Strait; but they make it a mile broad, and by consequence not so rapid. The Jesuits add, that both Banks from the City Jaen in the Province of Bracamoros, where it begins to be navigable, down to the Sea, are cover'd with Woods of very tall Trees, among which there's Timber of all Colours, abundance of Sarsaparilla, and the Bark they call Cloves, which is used by Dyers and Cooks. In the neighbouring Woods there are many Tygers, wild Boars, and Buffaloes, &c. The Jesuits began their Mission upon this River in 1638, have their Capital at the City of St. Francis of Borja in the Province of Manos, 300 Leagues from Quito, and their Mission extends along 3 other Rivers as far as the Province of Omaguas, whither they make sometimes long and dangerous Voyages in Canoes. They give an Account of 8 of their number that have been murder'd by the Barbarians, the last of them in 1707. Besides Borja and its Dependencies, they have 39 Towns founded mostly by their own Labour and Charge, but we shan't insist on their Names. Their Converts they reckon at 26,000, and the Missionaries about 18. They add, that they have contracted Amity with several numerous Nations, whose Conversion they hope for. The Portuguese have some Towns at the Mouth of this River, and a Fort on Rio Negro; so that of late Years they have traded much upon it, and, as several Spaniards inform'd me, during the last Peace they extended their Commerce as far as Quito and many other Places in Peru. I have insisted the longer on this River, because it is of so great Fame, and may be of mighty Advantage for Trade. Section 6